Hello everyone and welcome to the Rebrandly Link Up, the series where we bring you actionable online marketing insights from the experts. This week we're going to be talking to Head of Professional Services from Neustar, Tony Kirsch, about a topic that's really interesting to ourselves here at Rebrandly, and that is .brand top-level domains and what they mean for companies, businesses and brands. So without further ado, let's kick it off. So Tony, thanks again for joining us today. To start, can you give us a little bit of info about yourself and what it is you get up to over at Neustar?
Hey Sean, thanks for having us. Well, about myself, I lead our advisory business at Neustar. Neustar's a company that, amongst a lot of other technical innovations, we run a domain name registry business, which is exciting for us. It's one of the areas that I look after. And as part of that, we have close to 300 clients around the world that use what are called new top-level domains. So you may have seen that in some form of your digital travels. Some people would know it as seeing a .club domain name instead of a .com. Some may see it in terms of running into .barclays, for example, as what we call a .brand top-level domain in their marketing in the UK for the bank. And others might see it as times when they've seen a .com domain name or a domain name that doesn't end in .com. So Neustar is an organisation we're very active in that space, and we've been promoting what we think is the new evolution of the web, where domain names can have an ending or a suffix that more accurately represents the business, and trying to get away perhaps from the legacy of the internet that we grew up with, where it was sort of everything.com or something like that, and the challenges around that, and trying to move to an internet that's more intuitive and easier to navigate.
So Tony, today of course we're focusing on .brand domains, and you'd be heavily involved with this over at Neustar. So could you give us a brief overview of what they are exactly, and a bit about .brand TLDs for those who might be new to the term?
Sure. So around about close on 10 years ago now, I got involved in the global internet regulatory side of things. It's managed by an organisation called ICANN. They're a not-for-profit based in the US, but for the listeners today, it's probably easier to visualise them in your mind's eye as a United Nations type function. It's a policy body, a lot of governmental and stakeholder engagement from folks who ultimately decide on the rules of how we use the internet today. And most of you will sort of, understand as I explain that, the internet's a little bit like electricity. You don't really care until it's not working. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of people that are making the rules and the security elements and things like that to make sure that the internet's usable for us commoners. What's happened in that space over the last 10 years, Sean, as I mentioned, is what I call sort of a deregulation. And it's been the community that's driven this to say, listen, we think that there's an opportunity for the namespaces that would typically have existed. We call them top-level domains. I referred to it earlier. I should be perhaps a little clearer on that. Top-level domain is the last part after the last dot in a domain name. So we have what we call generic or global ones like .com, .net, .org. And then we have country code ones, for example, .uk for the United Kingdom, .ie, and so on and so on. So what's happened in the generic or global top-level domain space is that in 2012, there was an application round that allowed for pretty much anybody to apply for their own web extension. Now, there were some cities that did that. For example, .nyc for New York, .paris, .london, and they're now selling domain names to third-party mums, dads, bloggers, small businesses, etc., that end in .london instead of .uk, right? And that's really cool if you've got a business in London and you don't have a business, for other parts of the world or, the UK. And it also meant that they were able to get domain names that were more meaningful. So whereas most of the good domain names in a .uk, for example, might be already taken, when they released .london, all of a sudden there were these great domains available, holidays.london and things like that. So that's been really cool. And certainly there's roughly about 80 or 90 cities that have their own web extension now, and they've got more localized marketing, to keep it simple. The other side to that was there were many organizations that applied for what I call sort of as a vertical. I mentioned .club before. There's also a .sport. There'll be shortly things like .luxury or .physio for the physical therapy community. So those sorts of things. .menu, there's another good example that comes to mind. Those sorts of things are creating opportunities for small businesses and mums and dads to get domain names that more represent, for example, .menu if you're a restaurant, and you get the point of all of that. And then there was about 600 companies. You can think of them as Fortune 500 type-ish companies, very large entities predominantly, who said, look, we'd like to get .barclays, I mentioned that before. There's a .Google, there's a .Apple, there's a .Nike. And slowly but slowly, these organisations are starting to, as I say, drop the .com in their marketing and start to look to more meaningful messages to the left-hand side of the dot. So, for example, it could be savings.barclays, it could be blog.google, and starting to get people, like as I mentioned before, into just two simple words that make sense, that have a dot in the middle of them. And that's been really amazing for those organisations over the last 3 years. They've started to slowly launch those into their marketing communications. Some, like Barclays, have made the big shift. So, for example, if you go to, and your listeners go to barclays.com, they'll see that the site is actually home.barclays, and that's the evolution that they've gone on. And others, for example, AWS with Amazon, they've looked at more micro-site campaigns. So, for example, buildon.aws, Build On is one of their campaigns from last year. So if you were traveling in the US, you would have seen a lot of billboards for Build On as the campaign, and then buildon.aws was the supporting domain name. So long answer to your question, but it's an evolution in the way that we use the web, and in particular for brands to be able to own their own namespace, own their own web extension, and therefore be able to create any domains that they want on the left that suit their business purpose.
So when it comes to .brand domains, what is the process involved in acquiring one, and who would they best be suited for? Like, from a marketing perspective, what would be the incentive to get them?
Right. So let's just talk process first of all, and then we'll talk about benefits. The process to get one has closed for now. There will be another round in the next year or two, maybe even a bit more. And we're currently, as an industry, working through that process so that people can begin that application process. The last application and the only application process so far for that occurred in 2012. So the process of getting one was really to find someone like Neustar or that had the expertise in running domain names at a registry level. Okay, we call that the sort of when you buy a domain name from your GoDaddies or your local retailer. That's typically what we call the registrar community, people who sell domain names and obviously sell you things like web hosting and email and things like that to support it. Behind it is the electricity company, what we call the registries. And in order to get one, you needed to submit a very hefty application to ICANN. It wasn't cheap. You're talking somewhere in the order of $185,000. So it wasn't for the faint-hearted, right? But with it came this license to run your own web extension forever. So, for a lot of organizations, it's been really exciting. Why they did it, it's a mixed story, Sean. Some did it purely out of defensive purposes. For example, international business machines are not the only people that own trademarks in IBM. So when they applied for .IBM, part of their the decision-making process was, well, is there another organisation around the world that could theoretically get .IBM, and therefore we need to protect our trademark? Others were thinking of it a bit more strategically, i.e., perhaps even there's something in the middle of that. I think there was some that said, this sounds like a good opportunity. We don't really know what it is, but this is the internet. It's not going anywhere, so let's get one and see what happens. And then there were others that said, look, yeah, we're really trying to use this to overcome some challenges that we face in the digital world today. And if you think about as a large company, what sort of challenges typically exist in the domain name part of their marketing is, well, number one, access to domain names. Number two, the cost of managing large portfolios of defensive domain names. I think also the challenges of having confusing domain names. We're going to talk a little bit about links in a moment, I'm sure, but lots of organizations have domain names that they own that they've acquired because there was some legacy traffic 20 years ago, or it's actually a really complicated situation to have, and having one single domain front, for example, like IBM.com is a limiting element to that business. You've got IBM.com / 20 million things to the right hand side. Makes it really difficult for consumers. So I think my personal intuition and what we're seeing now is that .brands are helping organizations to really overcome the challenges that they face at a customer experience level, i.e., how do I reduce the friction between what you see in a TV campaign, a billboard, or a social media link, and how do I get you to click and type and get to where you want to go as quickly as possible in an as trusted manner as possible. And for those that are starting to do that, we're starting to see that customer experience really improve. You're seeing organizations really put the power back into the customer's hands and saying, look, we're giving you an opportunity to come and find what you want, and you might not have to use search, or you might not have to click around and try and find things. We have an ability to bring you deeper content in a very simple URL that might not necessarily be available on the homepage, or save you the trouble of clicking around on a search result page. So I think they are very continuously and consistently become the digital footprint for brands, and certainly when there's another round of these in the next 2 or so years, you'll see the vast majority of organizations with the financial capability to really look at getting one of these. This will be the sort of thing that you use over the next 10 years as a digital marketer, and very quickly forget how you used to do it, because it just makes a lot of sense. A bit like why we like iPads or why we like color TV. It's just, when it's better, it just eventually takes over.
So over the past couple of years, we've seen quite a number of large brands acquire their own dot brand TLDs, using them either for their entire online presence or simply for one element like social.
Yeah.
In this time, have you seen any examples that might jump to mind significantly?
We do become sheep pretty quickly in the digital world. I've got an Instagram platform, you get an Instagram platform, I go and do this in social, you go and do this. So it's not to say that the industry itself isn't, evolving, because I think it is. Like, there's more MarTech companies that are involved in the space and analytics and things like that than ever before. And as a marketer and as a client using those things, my biggest challenge really is managing the breadth of choice that I have in terms of service providers, rather than saying, very rarely would you have a niche that's a niche need that's not being met. It's unusual. So the real challenge, I think, for brands is how do you distinguish yourself, right? And how do you do something different where your competitors can't do it, or certainly can't copy it as easily. And .brand is one of those things that, in many verticals we have a large number. Let's use finance, for example. We work with probably 7 or 8 of the top 12 banks in the world, but there are clearly 5 that don't have their own .brand for whatever reason, and would be looking to get that in a couple of years' time. So then, more specifically, am I seeing people that are starting to use it in the right way? Yeah, and let's focus on social just for a moment. I think, with all due respect to some people who are in the industry, we had a couple of challenges, right? So Twitter, first of all, made us use short links. So we, by default, required ourselves to need something to shorten the link. And the smartest thing we had at the time, and has certainly been a fantastic tool, has been things like, Bitly or some of the early founders of link shortening. And I think what's, perhaps not failures, but I think more the successes, is people starting to question that status quo, i.e., why do we use that? That doesn't look anything like a trusted link. It doesn't look anything like our brand. Certainly many companies that I work with have made the step in between that, where they've acquired some sort of hybrid version of their brand in a domain. So for example, es.pn or something like that. Even Google did it, right? So goog.le. Now, unfortunately, not every country code in the domain world .le or exists. So you then just start to see some real horrible efforts at trying to as I call it, creative. Thank you. I was going to say bastardized. Creative is much nicer. Thank you. It's early in the morning here. To think about creative ways to make it look. I think over time, customers are becoming a little bit wary. It would be unusual, I think, for someone who's in a digital world regularly to have not had something happen to them, whether it's a fraudulent email or a scam on Facebook or something. I think it's unusual if you live in a digital world now to have not, in the modern day equivalent of being burgled in the in the early 1900s. Like, I think everyone's been burgled, so we're kind of a little bit wary of trust and security. So for me, the game is, how do you share your message as quickly as possible, as easily and intuitively as possible, and as securely and trusted as possible? So I think the es.pn/random code thing is a step in the right direction, but it's a hack. Let's call it what it is. It's a hack halfway to what you really want. So there's companies, for example, like Zara, the retailer, who have go.zara/promotion name, white shirt, 25% off, things like that. And the link matches the messages in the code. And they're starting to see situations where the link is actually showing exactly what you would expect it to show. So, that's still a consumer awareness thing that's happening. But I can see that, and we're working, for example, with organisations like HSBC, who are doing very similar things in their social media. where they're able to be on brand, on message, and make it trusted and secure. That's the next evolution of link management for me. That's the space where I think organizations will very, very quickly, and it's very simple to do. I know you folks at Rebrandly do have a fantastic tool that does this. It's very simple to do, and very powerful to the consumer. It says, instead of seeing these random codes at the end of our tweets or in other forms of social media, we're going to give you a trusted link. And better than that, we're going to reinforce that social link in our outdoor advertising, in our TV campaigns. So gradually you're going to see more and more and more something.zara/something, or maybe something.barclays or something.hsbc. And the more and more times that we see it, the more and more we're going to educate consumers about what I sort of call as this next evolution of the internet, the ability to go to a trusted space and go there yourself.
Obviously, for the likes of ourselves here at Rebrandly, branding and domains are a big part of what we do. Are brands currently taking advantage of .brand domains for something like branded links? Would you see these providing any advantages over generic TLDs?
Right. So what I've learned over the last, in particular, say 18 months, Sean, is that there's really no difference in philosophy, at least, between a link that appears in a TV commercial, that appears in Facebook, that appears on an outdoor billboard, right? What they're designed to do at a purely functional level is link you from something you saw, heard, whatever, to some identity. We used to do it with jingles, with phone numbers, and we still do that obviously to some extent, but they're all links. They're inherent elements to say to someone, you want something, this is how you get there, or this is how how you can get it. So what I see moving forward is that brands who are starting to embrace this, and there are some, like I mentioned HSBC, that's another one. HSBC is starting to do campaigns that end in .hsbc, and they're also starting to use it in their social media. Now, inherently, as I say that, in today's world, as digital marketers, we say, well, they're two different types of links. But reality is that they're not. And what if they could manage those things on one single platform, and you were starting to get, what sort of views do you start to see of customer behavior if you're tracking a link that you can fully see using a platform obviously like Rebrandly? What can you see? And what do you learn about customer experience in the online and offline world? And how do you, as a CIO, maybe I could even throw a third element into that. Like, what about our internal links? What about our document sharing? What about some of the ways that we operate by way of even simple things of payroll and finance and employee engagement, survey tools and things like that? What if I had a single view of all of those things that was being driven by a set of links that I could see and control? We've never been able to do that before. So I don't know of an organisation that's doing it sort of to the extent that I'm referring to. At Neustar, we do it. We use .neustar, which is our .brand top-level domain. We use it in our campaigns. So, for example, it'll be security.neustar. My email address ends in a domain address that it's at team.neustar. All of our social media links are powered by a .neustar URL, and we use it in as many single places as we possibly can. Our single sign-on for our authentication, we use it for our internal tools, and as many places as we can, we're starting to put .neustar into our story, and that's giving us a unique view of our user behavior, both external and internal. And I think that if I sort of imagine the role of the CIO in the next 5 years, it's how can I get a really good view of what's happening internally and externally across my business by way of traffic. To me, intuitively, that makes sense to do that on a single domain platform, i.e. .neustar in our example, because you simply won't get it when you've got IBM.com, IBM.co.uk. It just doesn't work like that. So you need to be able to manage what's going out and therefore get a single view of what's happening.
So Tony, if a brand or business is thinking of registering a .brand TLD today, what would be the 3 key pieces of advice that you'd give them before doing so?
Right. I think the first part is to be prepared. I work with a lot of organisations leading into the 2012 round who simply underestimated the complexity of the application. I mentioned to you this, the governing body, ICANN, gives away the licenses for those that apply. And it wasn't just as simple as, stumping up your money. You needed to be able to show them that you had the financial and policy and strategic and technical backing to make sure that it was a success. Put simply, we don't let things into what's called the root zone of the internet, i.e. .com, .barclays, etc. We don't put things in there ever if we think there is a second that they're going to come out or fail, right? Because it's internet architecture, and it's very different to Tony.com. If I break my own web server and my website goes down, I'm the only one that's impacted. Whereas if we break, a top level domain, every domain and every email and everything underneath it falls apart. So whilst we're talking about domains, we're not talking about domain names. We're talking about top level domains, and they're very, very separate pieces of content or context. In that space, I would say number one advice is prepare early. You're going to need not just the budget, you're going to need sign off from your board. We need things like, certainly this is what happened in 2012. I imagine it'll be very similar in the next year or two. You're going to need to have a very detailed application. I think most of the ones we did were, 300 or 400 pages. So that takes time. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made in there. So that'd be my first advice, to stop what happened to a number of the people I work with, which is they just ran out of time. They just, they underappreciated it, and despite all of the efforts that we collectively made, it just wasn't enough for them to get it done in time. So don't miss out. Second thing, I think is I'm yet to really meet anyone that's done this alone. And I don't mean that to sort of pitch Neustar services, though of course in some ways I guess I am. The reality is it's complicated, right? You're using technology that even your most advanced person in your CTO office will never have heard of. It's very industry specific, domain name geek type stuff, and you're going to need help to run all of that. Then I think the third part would be really have a clear strategy of how you're going to develop the ROI. I mentioned that there's 550 to 600 of these companies that have got one now. Most of them are using it, and you could certainly look at our promotional site for those that are interested. It's makeway.world. Makeway.world is our site where we show all of the things and evangelize the .brand movement, so you can see who's got one and the examples of how they're using it and all of our case studies and the different stories of the things that we've done. But I'd strongly encourage, I guess, to the third point, have a really clear view of how you're going to use it, and workshop that, articulate that early through the organization, so that when you get it, you have this sort of process where there's a rolling start, for that sort of analogy. It's very difficult for these things to sort of apply. They're typically applied for by lawyers and trademark professionals, just because of the nature of the application. The speed in which you can shift it to your digital marketing team is often the determinant of your success. And most of the people that we work with that have been highly successful in this space have been ones where the marketers have been able to get their hands on it, work with people like us to then understand, hey, here's the 50 things you can do. Pick 5 that kind of make sense for you, that are nice and easy wins, and build momentum through that way. It's unlikely, in fact, almost impossible, that you're going to get a situation where a digital company of the nature of the size that will do this will come in and walk away and say, oh, look, we're going to move from, Tony.com to .Tony. It just doesn't happen like that. You need slow and strategic goals that show our ROI along the journey.
Fantastic. Nicely summed up. So to finish up, Tony, what in your opinion is the biggest benefit of .brand top-level domains, and why are you such a big advocate for them?
It's a good question. I think I might take 2 if that's okay, Sean. I think simplicity. I think simplicity is one. I think that as brands in a digital world, we have more and more to say than ever before. And whilst customers' capacity to increase that content, consume that content, has increased somewhat, naive of us to think that we can continue to pump the volume of content onto the internet and have it all remain valuable and viewed and consumed by customers. So I think simplicity is the key. How can you make me understand your message as quickly as possible? How can you help me connect from that message to whatever it is you want me to do? Come to the store, visit that web page, click on that, whatever it happens to be. How do you inspire me and remove the barriers? Gary Vaynerchuk talks about it in terms of removing friction. How do we remove friction in the customer experience? So I think that's the first one, and I think .brands have a big role to play in that. If you can go to I'm trying to think of a good example here for you, but if you can go to basketball.nike in the next year or two, or you can go to even things like leomessi.nike and find out his promotional page. That is on the website of Nike, but it's hidden several pages deep. How do I get you there as quickly as possible and make it something that you want to come and find? So I think that that's one of the roles that .brands will play, is just getting people from A to B as quickly as possible. Nice and simple, clear messaging, that sort of marketing bundle. And I think probably the other part of it is, as a CIO, is the data that comes along with that. When you control all of the domains in your own, let's call it your own home, it could be .barclays or .nike. When you control all of the domains that are in that, you have a view that you would not otherwise be able to have, and that includes things that we do, obviously things like what Rebrandly does from an analytics perspective. It is a data set that doesn't exist in today's world, and I think we've got an idea today of how some of that's worked. I think in 5 years' time, we're going to see that and say, oh, how did we ever, why were we not doing this, in the first time? I think the reality, Sean, and I alluded to this earlier, is that I think the oldest company that I work with right now, Sean, is about 210 years old, and they've been on the internet for about 22 years. So let's not think for a second that the world doesn't shift. If you think about how it's shifted digitally in the last 10 years, let's not get naive and put our head in the sands and think that the way that we're doing our omni-channel platforms right now is the way it's going to be for future, because it won't. It's just simply not the way it works. But there are always things that are important, and I believe that a core domain, and in particular a domain ecosystem, will be the way that people say over time, yeah, how did we ever live in a world where there was only Tony.com when we were able to have anything we wanted .Tony and be able to simplify a message? Like I made the analogy before about the iPad. It'll be the sort of thing that our young generation grows up with, and it will be inherent in them, that they can go to creditcards.barclays or to blog.google and get what they want, and just think, well, how did you ever live in a world where that wasn't the case? Like, we just don't get it. It'll feel like that. So it's a slow burn and a very gradual improvement. But because of its simplicity and because of its ability to bring data to the organisations that didn't have it, those two benefits, I think, will be the reason why .brands continue to flourish over the next 5, 10, 20 years.
Well, Tony, again, thanks a million for joining us today. Do you have any closing thoughts for our audience, and where can people find you online if they want to talk more, discuss more domain-related things?
Oh, thanks, Sean. Look, I'm certainly available on Twitter, Tony P. Kirsch. For those who are interested, I'd really encourage people to either, welcome to look me up on LinkedIn, but I'd have a look at our microsite, makeway.world. We've put a lot of content up there. You can see everything that I'm talking about, everything from the evolution of how .brands have occurred, who's got one. Importantly, there's a little stats hub there. You can click on it and see how many pages that AWS have got and things like that. But also just to get a sense of the examples, we do a showcase reel on there of most of the major things that have occurred in the web. And you can see experience.apple. It's the new campaign for the iPhone X. See what Apple's doing with their .brand in terms of their marketing. So just little examples like that, I think, can jog people's wheels. The other one, I guess, if you're interested to get one, you can reach out to us at nextround.neustar. Neustar is Neustar. So nextround.neustar. Find us there and just register your interest. As soon as we know in the next year or so about when the application round is, we're more than happy to help folks to participate and get their own .brand. But appreciate the shout out. Thanks, Sean.
Brilliant. We'll be sure to check it out. Thanks again, Tony, and take care.
Awesome, man.
And there we are. That was Tony Kirsch from Neustar, and thanks again to him for joining us today. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, share and subscribe, and even comment below if you want to continue the discussion further. You can catch us on the branded link on screen or follow our social channels, and you can see more videos in the description and the suggestion bar. And until next time, take care.